All right, I think we'll get started. Thanks so much everyone for coming and joining us today to come have a little bit more of a discussion after that wonderful talk that we had. So we will get started. Welcome everyone. I'm Steph Wood and I'm part of the program team. I'm an English language learner support teacher for the Chatham-Kent area of the LKDSB. And I have some wonderful people helping me with the panel today. So Candace, would you like to introduce yourself? It is Candace. Meg Deal, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Magdiel Host. I am the Settlement Services Coordinator at Adult Language and Learning. I am also a diversity facilitator, and I have been working with newcomers for the last 12 years, and I've been doing a little bit of work in the field of racism and anti-oppression. So hopefully I can provide you with some of my thoughts on this topic and facilitate a little bit this conversation.
I'm so excited to hear Meg Deal. And Candace, can you introduce yourself? Sorry. You're muted.
You're muted, Candace.
Thank you. You'd think I would learn by now. I'm the new Inclusive Diversity Equity Consultant at the Lambton-Kent District School Board. After completing my Bachelor's of Education, I did a Master's of Education in Race, Class, and Gender. So that is my background that informs the work that I do. Meg Deal and I fangirl over the same writers and the same issues, and together we, with Heather Hughes, have built a fairly strong community among the three of us for in efforts to fight sort of anti-Black racism. I've also did the book study for those of you who were part of it for So You Want to Talk About Race. So it's great to be back and talking about the book again.
Thank you, Candace. And my teaching partner, Teresa.
I'm Teresa Lopatron. I work for the LKDSB. I'm an English language learner support teacher like Steph, and I'm happy to be here.
So we'll get started with our traditional territorial land acknowledgement. I shared these photos in the first session as well. These are all photos of waterways that are in Chatham-Kent, near where I live. I love being near the water and in the water, so I wanted to share some of the pictures. So here in the LKDSB, we're very lucky to be surrounded by many rivers, lakes, and streams. We use these bodies of water for recreation, industry, sustenance, and they are also homes to many plants and animals that provide food and help keep our environment clean. We must acknowledge that this area looked a lot different not too long ago. This area that we farm, shop, and live is the traditional territory of the Chippewa, Odawa, Potawatomi, and Delaware nations, and it is their belief that they are part of the land that sustains all life, and it is the sacred responsibility of all people to ensure that the environment remains protected. We must acknowledge that through treaties, the mutual sharing of this land was agreed upon, and within those treaties, there is an obligation and responsibility to care for this land that extends to all peoples. Please take a moment to reflect and make a commitment to the land and the people who have lived here for thousands of years. If you're joining us from outside of our board, look into the communities that are around you and the history of the land that you're currently living on. Just some housekeeping items. We will have the Q&A feature turned on. You also are able to raise your hand if you would like to ask a question directly to the panel. The chat feature will be enabled, so please feel free to use that. And live closed captioning is provided by Canadian Hearing Services for our sessions. So we wanted to get started with a Mentimeter activity for everyone. So if you have another device, or you can split your screen and keep the webinar open and go to www.menti.com. And if you use the code 1742285, You will be able to let us know, how is your perspective about race changed after listening today? What were some of the things that jumped out at you? What were some of the key learnings for you? So I will pull this up so that we can see what it is that we took away from today.
Steph, what was the number again?
Sorry, hold on. There we go. I thought it showed up on the screen as well, so sorry about that.
I'm wondering whether we as a panel can start discussing this while we're waiting.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
I thought when she talked about her son at the end, how he felt that he came across that nobody liked him, or no, it wasn't liked him, but how he was affected by not talking about it. And I thought that was a big eye opener as well, just to show that not talking about it doesn't make it go away.
So I'm going to jump in and start with the words. And the first one that jumps out at me is safety. And I think what you could glean from idioma Oluo is that marginalized, racialized, marginalized people do not feel safe in white spaces. And whether students articulate this feeling to you or not, and whether they're really cognizant of this feeling or not, it is there. So our spaces are based on white supremacy. And you know, I caution people from saying this is a safe classroom, this is a safe space, as if it's a done deal. It is, we are working to be inclusive, to create safe places of community, healing, growth, for all students, right? I'm sorry, Steph, could you go back to the other?
And I think, Candice, in that sense, I think it's important that we question the safety of who are we talking about in here. Are we talking about the BIPOC students, or are we talking about white teachers and white students? What is the safety that we're talking about here in here? Because it's important that we understand that, and goes back to the point that you're making in there as well.
Yeah, and just the fact that I think this is new knowledge for some people, that racialized people don't feel safe in white spaces.
Mm-hmm. And you know, I in this question throughout the conversation from Ioma, and when I asked the question about strategies for parents when they go into the school and raise an issue of racism, and they're made feel like that is not happening, is that safety as well. I am that mother that she's talking about. I am that person that is in the school constantly when something happened, but part of myself is constantly telling me, oh my God, here I go again. I don't feel safe when I walk into school and I have to talk about something like this, and I have been made feel like I'm crazy, too sensitive, what I'm saying is not true. There is no way a teacher or a administrator can be doing something like that because they're not racist. You know what I mean? That is part of the conversation of safety. We're talking about the safety of the students, but when we're having conversations as parents, what it takes for me to go into a school and make a claim about something that has happened to my child, my safety is jeopardized right there. The way that I'm treated, the way that I'm looked at, the way that what I'm saying is being responded or answered when I'm bringing it up, my safety is jeopardized in that as well. And again, going back to my point, whose safety are we talking about in here when we got that word from the conversation that we had today?
Absolutely. And McDill, I'm going to challenge you a bit. From the time you step out your door, the drive to the school, getting out of your car in the parking lot, right? So our kids also face this, getting on the bus. As soon as you're away from your family, walking to the bus stop, getting on the bus, going to school, our kids are not safe.
Yeah.
And that hypervigilance and that invisibility and visibility, hypervisibility at the same time, makes our BIPOC kids a target for racial slurs, for physical violence, for gaslighting, for criminalization, for people thinking that our kids don't have the same intellectual capacity as white kids. And we need to sort of recognize that this is a reality, even though none of us want to believe that this is the truth. This is the truth in our society that is, in our white supremacist society.
For sure.
Can I jump in for a second? I just learned something today, actually. I read it today, and it was the term weathering, right? And how discrimination and that constant sense of vigilance and that always being on guard and aware really takes a toll on people's bodies, right? like, and on physical health. And even like for myself, and I've talked about this before with Candace, you know, like it's that feeling like you're always tense, you're always on guard. And that's something that the students are feeling. And it's like, how do we, you know, make sure that we are letting students know that we are aware that this is happening to them, right? That we, you know, that we need to make everybody aware that it's happening. And we need to let the kids know that we know that they are feeling that way. And what stood out to me, what she said was like the act of anti-racism that we need to do to show the kids that we are, you know, being actively anti-racist.
Absolutely. Well, at the same time, you know, it's a really sort of delicate dance, because although these kids may be feeling this, we don't want to tell them that that is what they're feeling as well, because naturally they want to probably suppress and deny that, because how do you manage that and survival at the same time? The other thing that we need to talk about is students go from schools, like you said, Gretchen, with, you know, predisposition to certain health problems because of this stress. Then they go into the medical community who disregards their physical complaints as well, which leads to a lower life expectancy, right?
And not only the physical components of that, even learning disabilities. Sometimes they are dismissed because a teacher is looking at a child as a Black child, and you know, this is their attitude. This is the way they behave. They don't care about school. But in reality, we're not even going deeper into there might be a learning disability, and maybe that is the only reason why this student is behaving or not completing assignments or, you know, doing whatever they're doing in the classrooms. And it's so important that we understand race and understand the biases that we have when talking about race and racism, but it's also important that we understand that intersectionality, right? Our race and it's intersects with our gender, with learning disabilities, with immigration status, and that is a conversation that needs to happen amongst teachers. I mean, the way I see it, and I'm not a teacher, I am a mother, and I had personal racism issues in school with my child. But the way I see it as a teacher, you're standing in front of 20, 25, 30 students in a classroom. If you want to talk about diversity, it's right there in those four walls. So if you don't understand the intersectionality of all those identities, if you don't understand the consequences of, you know, not having an immigration status, coming from a lower social economic position, your race, your religion. If you don't understand how that dynamic in the classroom, we're not teaching the kids correctly. We're not addressing the issues that they might present in the classrooms. If we concentrate on what we know, and you know, I don't want to say that because we do this kind of work, we're versed on everything, but if we don't understand the way our biases and how they affect the way we treat certain people, then we're missing the point of this whole conversation as well.
Absolutely. And this is why So You Want to Talk About Race is so important, because race inhabits all those other identities and intersections and systems of oppression. So often as educators, we say, how could it all be about race? Or it couldn't possibly all be about race. Let's talk about LGBTQ+I, let's talk about language, let's talk about socioeconomic status, which is comfortable because a lot of teachers have used education as a social vehicle to surpass that oppression, and that's something to relate. But race transcends all of those social identities, and is really important for teachers to understand, and understand that in LKDSB, we are teaching in white spaces meant for white students. And you know, if we truly care about all students, that's the least we can do, is recognize that our spaces are white.
But you know, even if we want to take it, and I know we're talking about to teachers today, but even if we want to take it out of that education, in Chatham-Kent, in Canada, we are functioning in a white system. Healthcare, education, immigration. If you look at every system that is in place across the board, it's based on whiteness. So we really need to understand, and you know, when Ioma was talking about vocabulary, yeah, if we want to do this work, if we want to be aware of what's happening in our classrooms, how we're teaching our kids, and how we are addressing those issues, we need to be able to have that conversation and use the right words when talking about this kind of stuff, and don't whitewash it and don't gaslight it, because it doesn't work. Because you make me feel like I'm worth nothing when I go to you and tell you that this is a problem, and I know it's racism, and you're telling me no, you're telling me it is not, right? So again, every single system, and I don't want to make anybody in this conversation today feel that this is a job for educators. No, this is a job for every one of us, regardless on what field we work. Again, healthcare, immigration, education, you name it. We have to have this conversation because our systems were created on whiteness, period.
Absolutely. So that brings us to colonialism.
Yeah.
And getting really comfortable with the fact that we are doing all these things on stolen land. And also that we need to get our mouths around the terms, the correct terms, white, with value and with no value. So knowing that whiteness carries a value, that whiteness is at the top of the human hierarchy as its proximity to whiteness, but also as descriptors, white, black, indigenous, as descriptors, and normalizing that language is one of the ways that we can start to sort of decolonize and deconstruct systems of oppression that are present for everyone.
And Candace, I really appreciated when she talked about sitting with your thoughts and your feelings and really poking at the root cause of where those thoughts and feelings are coming from, and sitting in that discomfort and finding why and where that came from, and how you are going to deal with those thoughts.
Absolutely, Steph. That's a good point. And it's not because you're a bad person. It's because these messages are everywhere. There is no way that you can't be socialized to think whiteness is best, regardless of the body you inhabit. There is no way that you cannot, unless you are in an enclosed community and not dealing with all of it, not think that white is best. And that is not just North America, that is globally. So,
but yeah, when she was talking about our our lesson plans, thinking about your lesson plans for the day and how many times white comes into that. Like, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
And labeling, how she said to get your books out and see who the author is and label that. I think that is a lesson we can learn as teachers as well, because our classrooms and our literature in our classrooms is probably not obviously representing as much as it would be.
Yeah, and what message is that sending to the kids, right? And I've heard younger students say that before too, and they, you know, I've heard a story. There was it was at a school that I taught on Walpole Island, and one of the kids said, and I'm from Walpole Island, so, and one of the kids said to a teacher, "Wow, you have blue eyes. You could be a movie star," because movie stars always have blue eyes, right? And so it's like that message right there. This is what kids always see. These are the people who they look up to in the movies or in the books and anything, and that's the message that is getting sent to the kids.
Absolutely. On that note, Gretchen, I have to jump in and say, read Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye.
Okay, I'll write it down.
Well, one thing I want to say is that we, by Black people and people of color, we didn't start this conversation. We were brought into this. We were pushed into this. And when we talk about colonialism and whiteness, and when we talk about stuff about sitting in that place and see, I want to say sitting in that place, but see where you are within that system, right? Because again, as a Black person, I'll tell you something. The last thing I want to do is go into a place and tell somebody that this was racist. I don't want to have to prepare myself to have that conversation. I don't want to have to tell my child that he needs to behave and dress and do things in a different way, because people are going to look at him as to what they think he is. A Black child from a family who has no intentions of supporting him, whatever he wants to do. You know what I mean? So that is not the kind of life I want. And when we were talking about our safety, it's stressful. It's hard work to every day get up in the morning and
students not feeling safe when they're not told how something is dealt with. If they don't feel that they're being heard, us saying it's dealt with and not saying anything doesn't facilitate trust. I can understand the privacy issues, but what would be a way that we can make students feel safe and that they are being heard?
well, you know what? I don't work in school. I don't know how this is dealt with. And I'm sorry I keep bringing this conversation to my personal life, because again, I have lots to say when it comes to that and schools and my child. But one thing I like to say that I understand confidentiality. In the field that I work, confidentiality is important. I am not supposed to be sharing information about clients with other people unless the client has signed a consent, and that's what we do. When it comes to, and again, this is just my opinion, when a child or a parent or whoever brings an issue of racism to you, you don't have to have an answer right then. But one thing that you can do, and I'm telling you this in my personal opinion, don't just brush it off and don't get back to me. Don't just brush it off, bring that child to that office and say, hey, listen, we talked to this other student, this is what we're gonna do. This is not only for BIPOC, this is for people. When you have a problem, you want to have an answer. And that answer not necessarily has to be right there, what the solution is gonna be and how we conquer those. The answer to be only to say, you gonna look here, we're going to do whatever. That could be educating the student. That could be educating the staff. As an educator, you need to be able, when anybody brings an issue up, any issue, but we're talking about when anybody brings an issue raised to you, you need to be prepared to have an answer. No. Me or my child. So again, issues of race are difficult to deal with. But educators, administrators, need to be prepared for that conversation. I know it's not easy, especially when it's so uncomfortable for you to talk about it. It's so uncomfortable for anybody to say that you have a teacher amongst your 60 teachers in your school who might be doing something that is racist, because let's just make that clear. It's not about that person being racist at all the time. They did something that is racist, they said something that is racist. It doesn't mean that the person is completely racist 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, although it could be the case, right? But you need to be prepared to bring that around. You have to bring it around. You can't just leave it hanging.
Absolutely.
Because then how do you tell that child that he has to go back to school the next day or the week after when nobody has explained to him what the school did? Accountability.
So that we are having those conversations, yes, when it's not escalated, but also so that we can help educate those around us to have conversations when it is tense too.
Sorry, Candice. I think, you know, we should be asking, Candice and I do that all the time, just cut us up. Oh, sorry. I think the question that I think that we have to be asking, that what is it with our kids and our Black, Indigenous people of color teach that we have with the board, when we do not address and bring that conversation to a full circle when an issue of racism is brought up? What is the message that our kids are getting? And again, our teachers, because there are teachers or there are Blacks and Indigenous and people of color, what are we telling them when we're not having that conversation and bringing it back and say, no, we have to have a conversation. There's a need for education. There is a need for accountability. There is a need for conversation with the students and teachers. I want to say this should not be role specifically or exclusively teachers. Our kids are in the classroom, so as parents we have to have this conversation to our homes, because our kids are bringing those conversations that they're using the N-word and they're being discriminatory and racist, right? So I don't want to put all the weight of the work that needs to be done just on the educator, because we have kids that come from so many different families at all levels. That work has to be there. But the schools can do two things. You can educate the educators to educate the kids that are in the classrooms, because they can, as educators, you cannot control what conversations happen at home. You can control the dynamic, that conversation.
Identity is just a non-negotiable.
Candice, sorry, there's a question in the question and answer section. Sorry, on the topic of safety, are there protocols in place in the LKDSB about how students are to handle racist incidents? Ijoma said something about how sympathetic school personnel often don't have the power to address them.
That's going to change quickly. No, we don't. We're working on that. I'm working on that. I think we have really good policies. We have really good regulations. We don't have any procedure. We don't have any way to deal with language and the mandates. You must deal with that. I will say that the Ontario Anti-Black Strategy, written in 2017, I think, has some really good information. Ontario human rights. I mean, Ontario human rights is, I think, how could you not? It's mandated there. So it's not about having the policy. The policy is there in terms of the have a working knowledge of that for survival reasons than other people. So as a board, we are looking to explicitly and write the that goes the regulations and the policy. So not it's come down, and education yesterday being very specific about what to do and shouldn't do, our moral responsibilities, are how to be this is all just for us, we're interested now. You can then go home and say what you like, but in schools. And the other thing I want to bring up, honestly, is the talk in the staff room. So this is one place in my estimation that accomplices can really do the work. Talk in the staff room. So I know what talk goes on, and that's with me in the room. I'm not sure what talk goes on when I leave the room. And the talk that goes on often in the room or has been discussed or whatever, it's not like BIPOC people don't know the talk is happening. We're not going to run on that belief that everybody's nice, everybody's nobody's homophobic, all of that, that's not going to be given anymore. The given is system is oppressive, our society is oppressive, and that a certain group of people have privilege and are seen as human. That's going to change with support from ministry, from Ontario, from the work we do with each other, from networking, our community, and most importantly, from care that we have.
Speaking out is power. You may not have the power to change the things that were put in place by your supervisors, school superintendent, whatever you call them. You have the power to speak up and to stand up with when something is happening that is racist. When we stand up and when we speak up, those changes are going. Like your own body, to speak up and to raise the point of what's happening, because unfortunately, sometimes people are listening to people of color. Sometimes when the white person means and it's happening, they have their answer given to you. Now, that how comfortable you are in sometimes losing some of your friends, not being looked at positively by your supervisors or principals or whatever. How comfortable are you in bringing that conversation and dealing with what could happen after? That's another conversation that need to have, right? As well.
Need is you be aware that our claim so that we really do need your voice. The flip side of that is that we also need you to amplify voices and not take BIPOC voices and words on as our own sort of information, but give credit to BIPOC writers, BIPOC scholars, BIPOC people who have their lives and their careers. Your power and privilege move along at the same time, amplifying BIPOC voices so that they do speak on an equal level, both student, staff, whomever.
And that's why it's so important to understand what being an ally is in situations like this.
We have another question.
List of do not have I'm if somebody I alienate ask that person, do you have kids? Why are you asking that question? So, you know, it's sort of inane, seemingly inane, sort of questions. They reading the
No, I'm trying to find both too. But no.
Somebody in the Q&A is page 175. Thank you, Vivian.
Yep.
So, somebody has question 1-3 daily up. Some things called what are respectfully and you just do I they happening to you is real and so if you are teacher with participation excellent. What do you mean by that?
Understand what that means.
Yeah, what heading when you said that? Why is that? So everyone sort of like group language might come forth. Why did you say that?
Was it? That's in say, right?
Absolutely. The only is clarify. I'm asking you to be inauthentically. This is where I say that about white students hanging out together. Um, why is that a problem? So, you know, how am I supposed to take what you just said? Tell me, how am I supposed to just take what you've said? Is good. Reinforce that good intentions are not the point.
You impact, something that you cannot undo. So that is we have to have a situation like that as well, because people are always going to try to say that that's not what I meant. The comment about, you know, seeing black kids walking in the hall while all is together, it happens with the Syrian students. right? Why are they always together? Why are they not interacting with Canadian kids? How are we referring to our newcomer students within our schools? How are we treating them different? Because we're making those constant microaggressions. And those exact microaggressions, we're bringing them into our classrooms, and we're using those biases against these kids when we're marking their work, when we are judging the way they're behaving in the classroom, when we're making assumptions about them being absent from the classrooms without knowing that there might be a situation, and let's say the Syrian students, where intergenerational conflicts at home is affecting directly the way their life is going in Canada. When there is a high chance of them and their family of having trauma, precarious trauma that will affect their lives not only today but in the future. But we are actually making assumptions based on what we're seeing without going deeply and having that conversation. So it is important that we understand that anything we say is coming from our brain, and is coming from something that we really deeply feel that that's the way it is. So debunking those and understanding and asking the questions to students, whether they are BIPOC or immigrant kids, ask questions, get to know them. And I know it's hard. You have 25 students in your classroom. I can understand how crazy it is. But I work with immigrants to Canada. And one thing that I love to do is when I sit down with a new client that comes into our organization, I ask questions about their lives. I want to know what they went through and how is that affecting their life in Canada. So when I sit down with them and do my needs assessment, I have a little bit of an understanding as to why they don't want to be in person in class, or whatever the situation is, right? So, and in a lot of cases, people who are facing barriers, they're starving for that attention, for that support, for that comprehensive conversation to people outside of their small world to understand how they can help them.
They want to be seen as fully human.
We all do. That's the bottom line. We all do, regardless of our color of skin or anything.
One hijabi girl to another hijabi girl, they want to be seen as themselves, not as just one of those girls, right? And Magdiel, I'm so glad you brought up Syrian students and the need to address Islamophobia in the schools, as well as the need to address the obstacles and barriers that ELL students face, which align sometimes and overlap sometimes with race, with ability, with culture, and some people who don't feel like these students belong either in Canada or in their classroom. So the rhetoric that I hear about them taking away from the needs of Canadian students, that really isn't our problem, that is entitlement. So our white students are deserving, despite the fact that they're here because of colonialism and living and working on stolen land. White students are sort of entitled, but other people not. So I think that we have to have those conversations with the people who spout this sort of rhetoric, and I don't think that they do it mean-spiritedly, although the effect is one of extreme hate of groups of people.
Vivian pointed out a good quote from page 177. She says, as a mental health counselor who gets referrals from schools around anger management or social avoidance, I think it's really important for educators to understand remember, it's not this one incident point on page 177.
Yeah, that's so important, because it never is one incident, unfortunately. And again, when a parent walks into your school, or when a child goes and raises an issue of racism, that is not the first time that it has happened. That was the last drop you needed in that cup, that you said, you know what, this is enough. I don't care, but somebody needs to listen to what I have to say, and this needs to be addressed. It is never, ever, ever the first.
Violence is a last resort. And it is often the result of incredible frustration and daily occurrences. So when we suspend our BIPOC students for the violence they may have done to survive, or frustration or that anger, and not attribute it to how the bodies they inhabit, but attribute it to the social context in which they're trying to navigate racism at every corner.
And I think we have to remember too that school is just one part of that person's life, right? And we need to think about the messages that they're getting all the time outside of school, the things in the media, you know, the history of our country, right? And that's something that really teachers and administrators, everybody needs to kind of take into account. School is just one part of someone's life, right? And to comfortable in school, it comes from, it comes from colonialism, right? So, it's not just school, it's all of those things that are compounding together.
Yeah, and they're also probably dealing with some internalized racism as well, and that's a really tough thing for BIPOC people to deal with, especially for students at a young, unless they have parents who are actively speaking to the reality of systemic racism. And a lot of BIPOC parents, unless they study this academically, don't have the words to this would happen, when it doesn't matter how good you are or how better you are or how hard you study, clean your clothes are, how well put together you are, the extent of your vocabulary, you are still not free from risk incidents happening daily for these students and for all of us BIPOC.
And I think
Yeah,
one of the,
sorry.
oh,
Go ahead,
sorry.
Maidil. Go ahead.
I think when we talk about race in the schools, one thing is important that, and I don't, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that there is language. A lot of BIPOCs do not have language to even having the conversation of something that had happened. But that brings me back to my kids. And when I mean my kids, I mean my newcomer kids that are in school. Not only do they don't have the language to speak about specific issue, but they don't have the English language to have that conversation. So that is another portion that we have to take into account, that we think that these kids are having the best experiences in our schools because issues are now being brought up, and not being brought up because either the kids cannot speak the language, English language well enough to communicate, and definitely parents cannot speak the English language well enough to raise, to have that conversation. So are we really looking at the real picture of what is happening here when we're not getting the feedback from parents about parents, our kids? And the other part of that, and when Igoma was talking, when I asked that you do as a parent when you go into school and they make you feel like you're going crazy, mention that, you know, keep a record of everything that is happening, be in their faces, because that's going to make your child to have a better experience. I'll tell you, as a mother, that was the last thing I wanted to do, because the first thing that came to my mind anytime I have walked into school to address an issue of racism or an issue with my child in school is, if I speak up, how are these teachers going to treat my child? If I continuously go back to school and have these conversations and be that mother, no, I'm here, you need to listen to me, this is what is happening, how are we going to work this out? How is that going to affect my kids? What are going to be the consequences of me walking in there and saying that this happened when my child goes back into that with that teacher that I just technically squealed at? So when we're talking about this, we really don't have the real picture, because again, when I walked into the school, that is the 20th time that something happened to my son, but I just went to you the first time.
And you're not believed.
I am not believed.
Yeah, and I must say that, you know, not all BIPOC people have the same awareness. Just because you're a BIPOC person doesn't mean that you understand how this operates. I need to also emphasize the fact that this is an academic understanding about how racism works. When Ijeoma speaks, it is based on years of scholarship. Just as anything else can be studied, race has been studied. And it is the way that, I'm gonna speak for Black people, Black academics, that's the way we survive. That's the way we have, that's the only way we have to make sense of what is happening to us, because white society tells us that it's not true. And we're constantly having to battle with it's true. What I can say is, working with BIPOC students and parents, although the might be there and the analysis might not, the language might not be there, the analysis might not be there, the feeling is there. If something is wrong, the feeling of powerlessness, the indignity, the denigration, the that are, you know, to heal and then are picked off again is there. All the other challenges that our other students face, whether that feeling is articulated or consciousness as the actors, that feeling is there. And I'm not sure, and I'm yes, for Black people who haven't. So I'm, you know, and Yayede, I don't know if you can unmute Yayede. Because I want to speak where it's not my place to speak, but having that Black community and not being a minority, sort of informing who you are before you go into a country and become a minority, is very different from growing up in a country where you've always been a visible minority. So, you know, we need to sort of keep that in mind as well, that the Black experience is vast and different, just as everybody's experience is vast and different. So we need to look at the differences within groups as well as the differences between.
Candace, there's another question in the Q&A, and I also want to be cognizant of our time. So we're at 3:32. Building on the idea of power, do you have suggestions for educators holding their administration accountable and ensuring our schools are actively working racism, upholding and perpetuating white supremacy, in the context that the administration within the LKD is almost entirely white?
On that, seriously, right?
So, oh, sorry.
why I have the job I have, actually. And I don't say that jokingly to minimize that this is, you know, my raison d'etre for this work. Finally, it's being taken seriously. The damage is being acknowledged, finding strategies to work through that, hold like accountable, mandate understanding, mandate education that.
Keep bringing it up because I'm so happy that they have created this position for the board. I'm so happy that Candice is the one who gets to this work, even though it's not too fun, but it's good. But we have to keep conversation. She cannot do that work alone if you do not continue to have this conversation, if you do not continue to raise those issues. And I know it's a little bit intimidating to go to your principal, it might be a little bit intimidated to go to my AD and raise the issue, but that is a right. And in order for us to get things to do this, she needs to hear what is happening in the schools. So that accountability portion is not going to happen if you don't know, and whoever is in charge of the position don't know things that happen. So as a white teacher, if the issue that you have the need, and that is where your power comes in, without taking the place by people of color, have the conversation, bring those Black, Indigenous, and people of color into that conversation. But basically, like I said before, unfortunately for us,